Hello and welcome to the channel. I will tell you interesting scary stories from Reddit and not only. Do not forget to support the author of the story. I will leave his credits in the description. I also hope for your support of my channel in the form of likes and comments. I really appreciate it. Get comfortable in your bed, put on your headphones, and turn off the lights. It's going to be a night of nightmares. We're starting. The town of Common State, Florida, was built on rum, cocaine, and stolen Native American land. Technically, though, we didn't steal it from the Native Americans. We stole it from the Cubans, who took it from the Spaniards, who originally, almost 500 years ago, had raped and pillaged and scorched the earth of the native population from the small, backwoods corner of Florida that we eventually made our home. Home being a backwater, dirt-encrusted, kicked stray dog of a town. Common State had a population of less than 5,000 people and consisted of a couple of trailer parks, a few diners, and dive bars scattered about, and a downtown that had a couple strip malls filled with pawn shops, beauty shops, and cash for gold places. There's also a Motel 6 on the edge of town, where the cleanest thing there are the roaches. Me and my rat-scrabbling family were part of that population of 3,500. My dad dipped a while back. Whether he was still out buying cigarettes, or was actually in the belly of the crocodiles that lived in the swamps that surrounded this town, remains to be seen. But that just left my mom in our family's trailer, raising all 6 of us. Understandably, I moved out as soon as I could, but not technically on my own. My cousin Mikey had a spare bed in the 1-bedroom Motel 6 suite that he was renting at a discounted rate due to an understanding with the manager. I ended up moving in with him, which led to me witnessing the understanding every night, several times a night. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I'd like to point out that the manager of this particular Motel 6 was my second cousin, Patricia Bernard, and Patricia Bernard was Mikey Bernard's first cousin. So, yeah, I wasn't home a lot. Growing up, I had only 2 friends. Elliot and Adam were twins and were inseparable. Both had fiery red hair, both with tanned almond skin, dark, dark eyes, and both have lived with their grandparents in the spit and mud shack at the very edge of town, right next to the swamp, since they were babies. The local lore is that their papa was lost to a fishing accident, and their mama went crazy, searching every night in the neighboring swamps, looking for the body, until one day she just never came back. You do not go searching at night in the South Florida swamps. Despite this, Elliot and Adam were happy kids, growing up in a loving and supportive household with their grandma and grandpa. Collard greens and buttermilk biscuits were plentiful, and I'd often wander in with my nose in the air, sniffing like a stray cat about to steal somebody's lunch. They'd feed me, and then herd us outside, where we'd play for hours underneath the scorching sun. And what else is there to do in a deadbeat, 2-bit swampland town like ours than go fishing? Back then, the swamps were our friend. We'd slather on DDT, banana boat sunscreen. We'd grab bottles of Coke, handfuls of wiggling live bait, and head out into the greenery maze. The swamps were thick and alive. Twisted, gnarled branches of pond cypress fanned above us, its canopy bustling with wood storks, limpkins, lizards, and the occasional eastern cottonmouth, and thick roots from bald cypress trees would clog the water, making it difficult for us to paddle our way through. We kept one eye out for crocs always. Those bastards were notorious for sneaking up on us. That being said, I hated fishing. Couldn't stand the feeling of hooking the worm. On the off chance, I managed to catch something. I'd quickly hand it over to Adam, who was eager to gut it for me. He wouldn't even wait for the fish to stop flopping. He'd gut it right there in our little makeshift campsite, his eyes gleaming oddly in the summer heat. Gilly, our middle school bully, was coming home from hunting when she saw us heading home one day. Is that mud? Are y'all eating it? Are Sissy Brandon and the black-eyed twins eating mud in the swamps? She wrinkled her nose at us and flipped her dishwater blonde hair. She was a grade older than us, a foot taller, and was the richest person in our backwater town because her parents owned both the general store and the town's only gas station. "Oh, eat dirt, dillweed," Elliot had yelled back, "or you can't come to my birthday party this weekend." She flicked a piece of mud off her lip. "And I know you want to." Yeah, I chimed in softly. What she said. Because you see, round these parts the Benoits were infamous for their parties. The Benoit family might have been as broke as the 10 Commandments, but dang them it, if they didn't know how to throw a party. I remember one. It was the twins' 14th birthday. Grandpa Benoit had managed to wrangle an old RC excavator with a claw grabber and had it set up by a giant mud pit. The kids were taking turns flinging themselves off the construction equipment, while the adults huddled around bottles of moonshine in the shed bordering the swamp. The Benoit moonshine was legendarily strong, like paint thinner strong. As you took a shot of the stuff, you could practically feel the alcohol dragging your spirit down with it to hell. To the average city slicker, a simple swig would burn holes in their stomach. But to us, well, our stomachs were built from calluses and strips of steel wool. Later, at their birthday party, I remember that Adam had snagged a bottle from the adults and was forcing Jilly, Elliot, and myself to swallow sips of the shit. I think it was his idea, too, to build the bonfire. It was too big of a bonfire. A massive 20-foot beast, built with enormous wood pallets and empty barrels of old whiskey. And after Adam emptied out on it the rest of the moonshine, the flames crackled hotly and roared dangerously high. I may have been a cork high and a bottle deep, but I still remember how all the frogs and crickets went silent as the flames reached the top of the bald cypress trees. The swamp seemed to refuse the fire, swallowing the light and heat whole. It wasn't until Jilly started screaming did Grandpa Benoit realize that yet another infamous Benoit party had gotten out of control. Jilly was sobbing hysterically, curled up in a ball against the back of the shed. She was clutching the silver cross she always wore, and between the heaving sobs, she was muttering the Lord's Prayer under her breath. As Grandpa Benoit started to drag her to the house, she started screaming. It was the dolls. I heard them talking. That stopped him in his tracks. Dolls? What dolls? The ones in the trees. Her face was ghost white, and her eyes wild. Her breath was putrid from the moonshine. She pointed towards the swamp. They were whispering to me. Grandpa Benoit spun her around and gripped her shoulders so tight his knuckles turned white. "Tell me right now, did you talk to him?" But Jilly didn't answer. She was so drunk and hysterical. "Come on, Missy," Grandpa Benoit smacked her. "Focus. Did you talk to him? Did you answer them?" He shook her again. "Even a single word?" "No," she sobbed, cradle in her face, where Grandpa Benoit had smacked the daylights back into her. "No, I didn't." "Then we're fine." Grandpa Benoit visibly relaxed. "As long as you don't talk to him." Grandpa Benoit was our whole world. He was kind, he was fair, but above all, he was incredibly superstitious. The Benoit bonfires were a local tradition, as were the scary stories we told around the flames. Adam would tell his story about the Florida skunk ape again, much to the groans of everyone who had heard it for the 100th time. Or Grandma Benoit would tell her story about the bloody bucket bridge. Gilly had a story about witches that once followed her home when the moon was full, and Eliette's friend Anna would tell her story of the blue children she'd seen once watching her through her first floor bedroom window. But nothing could top Grandpa Benoit's story about the tooth fairy that lives in the South Florida swamps. He'd wait until the sun was set, the flames were high, and the whiskey was running thick. It was the height of summer in 1970. He'd start dramatically. I was hoping to enter the local fishing competition in nearby Key West, so I spent every spare minute of my time practicing my technique in the local lakes. Nothing was biting, so... Was nothing biting, or were you just bad at fishing, Grandpa Benoit? Somebody hollered from the back. But Grandpa Benoit just smiled. It wasn't me. A bunch of the local boys were fishing with me, and our lines kept coming up empty. We moved from spot to spot, but we weren't catching nothing. After days and days of failure, we were starting to get frustrated, and with only a week left until the big competition, somebody had the bright idea to move into the one place we hadn't tried yet. He paused dramatically. The Cayo Hueso swamp, the largest, most uncharted swamp that surrounds our town. It was especially hot that day. So hot that we decided not to go fishing until the sun had mostly set. That was our first mistake. It wasn't until the day was starting to set that we finally headed out. I remember thinking how quiet everything was. All the crickets and frogs were so still when normally at dusk they'd be singing in full concert. There were 3 of us, and we headed out on Ricky's boat in hopes of catching something. We entered the swamps a little over that way. He gestured a little to his left, and sure enough, there was a small opening in the thick canopy of pond cypress trees. It was quiet on the water. Ricky kept trying to make jokes to break the tension that was building up. I still wasn't catching anything, and frankly, I was ready to turn back. We were deeper in the swamp than I'd ever been, and just one false turn. Bam! Grandpa Benoit smacked his knee. We'd be lost out there, but Ricky refused to turn back. Said he was catching a damn fish. Said he wasn't going to lose this competition due to any redneck, hillbilly superstition. Grandpa Benoit shook his head. You see, there's a saying round these parts. The fire crackled in his paws. Don't take what the swamp doesn't want you to have, or you'll lose something you love. It had been 5 hours at this point, and me and Jane were ready to go home. But Ricky wouldn't go, not without casting one more line into the water. And despite our protestations, he dug into the bucket of worms, hooked 2 of them, and threw the line far out. There it sat, floating gently in the water rippling faintly in the moonlight. Then suddenly it bobbed. The campfire was silent. Ricky went wild, saying things like, "Looky here, boys," and you chickens were ready to run on home. And who's going to be the winner now? And he was yanking on that line. But whatever was on the other end was fighting hard. He tried to get me to pull it up, but I wouldn't touch it. Then suddenly the fighting stopped. The line went slack, and it drifted to the surface. Grandpa Benoit paused. It was a doll. A small porcelain, dark-eyed, black-haired doll. The doll was so beautiful. Grandpa Benoit's eyes started to look misty. I remember thinking how sad it was she was in the water. I started reaching for her. He paused. When suddenly Ricky grabbed my shoulder hard. "We need to go. Now," he said, his eyes wild and terrified. I looked over. Jean looked dazed as Ricky suddenly turned the floodlights on. He grabbed a paddle and started to turn the boat around. I felt drugged. But we hadn't made it 2 feet before the boat hit something. The jolt nearly threw us overboard. It tossed all of us to the floor, and our fishing equipment went everywhere. Some of it splashed into the water, including Ricky's lucky Swiss Army knife. His papa had given it to him, and after he'd passed away last summer, Ricky didn't go anywhere without it. Ricky grabbed a light and shined it on the water where it had fell. I held my breath. Grandpa Benoit leaned back, his face thrown into shadow. Goosebumps crawled up my arm. There was something else in the water. It was a woman, Grandpa Benoit whispered. That's what we hit. Or at least I thought it was a woman. You see, the thing was almost totally underwater, except for her eyes, and she was looking up at us, watching us. I heard Jean whispering. I looked back. He was muttering the Lord's Prayer, and I had noticed that he'd wet himself. Then I heard something else, something faint. It was the ripples in the water. She was drifting closer, her dark hair fanning out behind her. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. Suddenly I felt something warm. Ricky had peed himself. The boat suddenly rocked hard to the left. Grandpa Benoit put his hand up. One pale, bloated hand slowly curled around the edge. Slowly, I saw her other hand reach up too. The thing started pulling itself up. Sitting on the floor of the boat, at first all I could see was the top of her head. Then her forehead, then those dark eyes. Then I saw her mouth. Grandpa Benoit paused, looking at us. Her mouth was like an open wound, extending down into her neck, but in her mouth lined rows and rows of teeth, like a shark's mouth but filled with teeth of different sizes, colors, and shapes. Nothing matched. It's because they came from all different human mouths, I realized in horror. Teeth, it groaned. Give me your teeth. Around the campfire, nobody took a single breath. Then bam, Grandpa Benoit howled. She took my teeth. His dentures flew from his mouth and landed on the nearest shrieking child. He had a full set of fake teeth and loved pulling them out, much to the dismay of Grandma Benoit. The campfire erupted into a calamitous, chaotic hullabaloo of shrieking, screaming children. Grandma Benoit started rounding them up, and the rest of the adults sprung into action too, gathering up the children that belonged to them. Through the din, you could hear Adam's drunken cry. So fucking lame, Adam was saying. He was still pissed he got booed during his skunk ape story. So fucking lame. You tell it every time. He was clearly intoxicated and was struggling to get up. A half-empty bottle of London's dry gin was in his hand. Elliot was next to him, clearly mortified. Adam, stop. Adam. Stop, sis. He shook her off. Fucking lame story. At least mine was real. He took a swig of the gin and wiped his chin as it dribbled down the front of his shirt. Elliot grabbed his arm tighter and tried to pull him down. Grandpa Benoit, completely expressionless, just watched him. What makes you think mine isn't? He quietly said. Fuck off, Adam, someone yelled from the back. Yeah, fuck off, someone else yelled. Who the fuck said that? Adam wheeled around. In a blind, drunken anger, he threw the bottle of gin, and it shattered against the side of the house. I'm fucking leaving. Tripping over firewood and pieces of trash, he stumbled out. Elliot had his arm in a death grip. Elliot. I gently touched her shoulder as she passed. Just let him go. But she couldn't. As Adam ran off into the woods, I watched as Elliot followed close behind. None of us were surprised when Adam got into his first bar fight at the tender age of 13. The man he was fighting was the local preacher who insisted on not pressing charges. We all drank, of course. But when we drank beer, Adam drank whiskey. He'd drink, and his language would get rougher, as would his hands and eyes. Elliot tried to enlist my help, of course, but after an incident between Adam and I, well, he barely even looked me in the eye anymore. It was the beginning of our senior year of high school, and I was starting to look at options for after graduation. Elliot was being really encouraging and helping me apply to colleges, but while neither of us had money, I wasn't smart like her. Colleges wouldn't want me like they wanted her. It was a Friday night when I got the invite for a special dinner that Grandpa Benoit had arranged at Funky Pete's Diner. I assumed this had something to do with Grandma Benoit's recent retirement from the library. Normally, Grandpa Benoit would have planned another bonfire, but on account of a situation with the local sheriff and his roasted police car, he wasn't allowed to anymore. Grandpa Benoit waited until the first round of drinks arrived at the table. Everyone was there: Grandma and Grandpa, Elliot and Adam, Jilly and her latest boyfriend Anna, Grandpa Benoit's poker buddies and their kids, Grandma Benoit's shooting range friends. Everybody. Grandpa Benoit's Diet Coke had come in a plastic cup, but he held it high anyways and dinked it with his fork. "Pipe down, kids. Shh. Hey, listen up, everyone." Grandpa Benoit pointed his fork at the end of the table. "Billy, hush your mouth. I see you chatting. I've got an announcement to make." Grandpa Benoit cleared his throat. "I'll keep it brief, considering that they just put the drinks down, and I know that's why y'all are really here." Grandpa Benoit pointed his fork at Elliot. "I'd just like to say how proud I am of this one. As of this morning, she has just received an early acceptance into not one, but 2 colleges." Shocked, I was stunned into silence. Why didn't she tell me? The table erupted into cheers. Both with full scholarships, too. I looked over at Adam. The look on his face was thunderous, murderous. So I guess she hadn't told him either. Adam suddenly shoved his chair back and stormed out. All the framed, signed pictures of Betty White, Elvis, and John Wayne that lined the walls shook as Adam slammed the front door shut. Elliot was at the other end of the table, pain in her eyes, as she watched Adam storm out. But I got up to give her a hug. After all, I could understand why she wouldn't have told me. Living in a town like Commonsday, Florida feels like you're slowly sinking, like Venice and the rising tide, only nobody can see the water that's slowly creeping up. The waters pool at your door, at your feet, and slowly breach your throat, your face, until you're fully engulfed. I'm not sure when I first felt the waters. At what point did Commonsday start to close? Its fanged jaws on my life. But all I know is that Elliot is getting out. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get me out too. Around 10 o'clock that night, I got a call from the owner of Host's Head, the local downtown dive bar. It was Adam. He'd gotten himself thrown out. We were still at Funky Pete's celebrating, because at this point, Funky Pete himself had joined in on the festivities too. But I left to go pick him up. I found him crumpled up outside, a bag of frozen peas taped to his face. The bag was stained red with his blood. "Adam." I gripped his shoulder. No response. My heart quickened, and I shook him a little harder. "Adam, Adam, I'm fucking awake." "Whew, sorry, thought you were dead for a second." I put one of Adam's arms around my shoulder. I pulled him upright, and together we stumbled over to my truck. "Not dead." He slowly peeled open his eyes. "Hi, Brandon." "Hi, Adam." I hoisted him up and threw him in like a sack of potatoes. "I need to get you home." Adam scoffed. "Nah, let's stay out." His blurry eyes focused on me. They looked wild. I've got more gin in the truck. I sighed, every time. I don't think your grandparents would like that. I don't think Elliot would like that either. But I saw Adam physically flinch at the sound of her name. Fuck Elliot. Fuck my grandparents too. Come on, Adam. Don't. No, listen. He grabbed my shoulders, hard. His red hair was wild tonight. The stiff, wiry curls were sticking straight up. Someone had done a real number on his face. His left eye was almost completely swollen shut, and his right eye had a spiderweb of broken, red capillaries. They looked manic, wild. The pit in my stomach felt heavy. Elliot's fucking leaving, okay? She's leaving us. You can't leave me too. His grip tightened on my shoulders. I wasn't a small guy, but Adam was easily over 6 feet tall and played offensive tackle for the football team. I don't think I could be here without you. Dude, come on. I propped him back up. He was so drunk he kept sliding off the seat. You'll be fine. You've got friends. Plus, it's not like that. Not like the... What? It's not like that. Fuck. At least not with you. I was so tired and so irritated it just kind of slipped out. Fuck, Adam, I'm sorry, But Adam reacted like I knew he would. Fuck you, he shoved me aside. And fuck you too. He wheeled around as I fell to the ground. You think I can't hear you? Talking shit? Adam, who are you talking to? We were in the back of the empty parking lot, behind the bar. A couple of beat-up station wagons were parked in front, but their owners were still inside drinking. He pointed behind me. I'm talking to those fuckers who have been whispering this entire time. He flipped 2 middle fingers up. I can hear you. I looked around, confused. No one. The only thing back there, besides the end of the parking lot, was the swamp, which my blood suddenly went cold. Adam, I said quietly, looking at him. Who's whispering to you? Adam pointed at the trees. Them. I looked back. Out of the corner of my eye, something white darted out of sight. It was around midnight when I finally dropped him off at home. The Benoit's house was quiet and dark, so I tried my hardest to keep Adam quiet as I unceremoniously dumped him on the living room couch. I thought about just leaving his ass on the front porch, but decided against it. I was heading out quietly when suddenly I noticed a lit cigarette floating in the darkness on the front porch. Fuck. I'm sorry, did I wake you? I sighed. No, Grandpa Benoit said. Just waiting for this one to make it back. What happened this time? I sat down heavily next to him. It was quiet, except for the crickets and the frogs. The usual. Too drunk. Bar fight. Didn't get in my car. Then I hesitated. And it's probably nothing but... But what? Well, I hesitated, feeling dumb. Adam talked to the trees. Grandpa Benoit's face went still. Suddenly I felt my stomach twist. I felt like I'd gotten him into even more trouble. Look, it's probably nothing. He was just drunk, and he was talking to the trees. Yes. There was a chill in the air I didn't like. In the dim light on the porch, I could see Grandpa Benoit watching me. The wrinkles around his eyes and lips deepened as he took a long drag of his cigarette. With a sigh, he stubbed it out in a crushed Mountain Dew can. Brandon, he said, have I told you how the men in Common Stay are cursed? The look on my face must have been priceless. Oh, it's true. By a witch, supposedly. During the impending Spanish invasion of 1570, the AI's people, the Native Americans, who were here first, had gotten wind of the Spaniards sailing over. Horror stories had traveled across the Atlantic about the rape and pillage and genocide, and instead of staying to defend their land, the AIs left, all except one. Her name was Yi Nagloshi, and the very moment that the blood-stained Spaniards entered her lands, she lit herself on fire. With her dying breath, she spun a curse to ensnare the men who dared live in the place she'd spilled blood. Through the deterioration of their mind, their body, or, Grandpa Benoit paused, or by taking them to hell herself. Wow, I breathed. What a story. Grandpa Benoit nodded. Yeah, I thought so too. Only a story. Until the night I lost my teeth. I felt my blood go still, and suddenly from the depths of the darkness, I felt like I was being watched. The story I tell you kids, well, most of it is true, Grandpa Benoit sighed heavily. I was out on the boat that night, and we were in the swamp, but I wasn't with Ricky or Jean. He sighed again. I was with Tom, my dad, the one who disappeared. I felt my heart stop. You had just been born, and he was a mess. I'm sorry. He tried to clean himself up, but the monkey on his back was too strong. He was still lying and stealing, and that night we went into the swamp. He'd been running from the cops. At 2 a.m, he broke open my front door to take the keys to my boat. I insisted I go with him. Grandpa Benoit wasn't even looking at me anymore. He was looking off in the distance, seeing something much different than the darkness of the porch. I knew in my gut that I was making a mistake, but he was tweaking on something strong, and I was afraid that he would kill himself out there. We went deep into the swamp to hide, too far. I kept telling him to slow down, to stop, but the demons in his hands kept pushing him further. Before I knew it, we were lost. That's when Tom hit something hard. It actually tore a hole in the engine bay, which leaked gasoline in the water. I remember feeling woozy and hazy from the crash, and thinking how pretty the gasoline was, like rainbows floating in the water. In the midst of all that spilled gasoline, a doll floated to the surface. A small, dark-haired, dark-eyed doll. Then another, and another. A tear ran down Grandpa Benoit's cheek. Then another. We were surrounded by him. Tom was sobbing, saying how we were going to die. That's when she floated to the surface too. 2 black eyes watching us from the water. Tom lost it. Started hysterically sobbing, screaming to the high heavens, asking her, pleading with her. The whole time I kept telling him to be quiet. Grandpa Benoit was crying harder now, tears running silently down his cheek. That you're giving them power when you talk to them. Only her eyes were above water. As Tom talked, she drifted closer. Then she stood up. I closed my eyes, picturing the description Grandpa Benoit always told. A horrendous mouth, open like a gaping wound. With rows and rows of human teeth she collects from her victims, circling down into her throat. "Give me your teeth," she whispered. At that moment, in Tom's insanity, he lunged at her with a knife. Grandpa Benoit growled. Fuck, I didn't know he had one. Didn't even see him pull it out. But the fucking moment, the second he did, she bit his arm and dragged him under. Grandpa Benoit had to stop there. He was crying so hard. I felt my heart breaking watching as he sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Brandon. I didn't stop her. But I thought I was going to be joining him down there shortly. I wasn't even surprised when I saw those black eyes again, not 5 minutes later. Except, she didn't drag me under. Instead, she handed me Tom's knife. And she looked at me. And then, in a sudden, horrifying understanding, I knew what she wanted. And using Tom's knife, I started to dig the first tooth out of my mouth. Then another. She watched me do it, and she fucking smiled. Grandpa Benoit wiped the tears from his eyes. The next thing I remember is blacking out from the loss of blood and waking up on the road to someone calling 911. The darkness sat heavy as we both sat there silently. We sat there until the sun came up, without saying another word. Afterwards, I felt like I should have maybe said something, but what? What could I have possibly said? Eliette left for school a month later, and Grandpa Benoit sent me with her. I tried explaining that I didn't have any money and no college acceptance, but he claimed that he had something arranged, and he did. I managed to get a job at a local hardware store and lived in the small studio apartment above the shop. Before I knew it, 20 years had gone by since I left home and never looked back. I was at peace with my life and felt like I had put the worst behind me until yesterday. I had just gotten home from the grocery store, still in my yoga clothes, to find a postcard sitting on the front stoop of the classic brick townhome I lived in. It was late and dark, and I carefully picked it up without dropping all the bags in my arms. It wasn't until I had flipped the lights on in my kitchen that I was able to read what it said. "Come and stay in the beautiful town of Common-Stay," it said. I flipped it over. I felt the groceries drop from my arms, the eggs that I had planned for tomorrow morning's veggie omelet cracked next to my feet. I'd recognize that handwriting anywhere. It was a series of 10 digits, a phone number. The postcard was signed with love from Adam Benoit. Do I give him a call?